All right, well, welcome to our workshop about collaborating with Jupyter Notebooks. As Jesse was saying, it is one of the premier methods. So Jupyter Notebooks are one of the premier methods for coding and data science using Python. And sometimes because of the structure of Python notebooks, it can make it really challenging to be able to collaborate effectively. And we're going to look at a package today that will help us to do that. So quick question, and please always feel free to drop things in the chat or just unmute yourself and answer. But thumbs up, like the virtual thumbs up reaction, if you have worked with Jupyter Notebooks in general on a project before. So individually, you've worked with Jupyter Notebooks on a project. Okay. All right, we've got some participants there. All right, so if you've worked individually on a project for Jupyter Notebooks, maybe in quick 30 seconds to a minute, tell us, how did you structure your Jupyter Notebooks for your project? So did you distribute the code across several notebooks, or was it just one big old long notebook? And you can put it in the chat or just quickly unmute and tell us about it. Okay, use a single notebook. Yep, yep. Import. Interesting. And so do you want to give us a little bit more details on the importing? Okay, gotcha. So it looks like you're saying that these are some different notebooks. So you have one for importing, one for data cleaning, one for analysis, one for graphs. That I like that. I like that. So when you did like the data cleaning, for example, and then the analysis, how did you get the code from notebook 0 importing into data cleaning or analysis? So did you just copy and paste the same code over and over, so it was just increasing length of notebooks, or another tool? I see, gotcha. Imported already clean data. So at the very beginning, I see, the very beginning of each notebook, probably you imported this clean data that you maybe made after 0 or 1 data cleaning notebooks, and then use that in the analysis or the graphs. All right, that definitely makes sense. I like that idea. That's sounding good. Anyone else? All right. Well, those are very good answers. And I think those pretty much kind of cover the general ways that we tend to use Jupyter Notebooks in data science. So I know when I first started, I remember writing this notebook that it just took me an eternity to scroll through. And it was almost as if I couldn't even read it because it was too much to comprehend all in one big old long notebook. But it does make sense to have everything in one notebook, mostly because it's really hard to put things in different notebooks because the kernels underlying aren't actually connected. So one way that I did find out that we could get around that is by using Jupyter Lab, which allows you to connect the kernel of one notebook to another, meaning that when you're finished running this one notebook and you have done all your cleaning, for example, you don't really have to save it into a separate CSV or something like that. If you connect the kernel, for example, for your analysis notebook to that first kernel, you can just reference the same variables that you had in the first notebook. So that was kind of a way to get around things, but at the same time, not all IDEs support that. And it can also become relatively unclear what exactly it is that you're using and where. Those are great ideas though. Okay, so second question. Thumbs up if you have collaborated with Jupyter Notebooks on a team for a project before. So it's not just you on the project, but it's you and several people, and you are all using Jupyter Notebooks. Thumbs up. All right, we've got some collaborators there. All right, I see. All right, great. So some questions for y'all. And again, please feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat. What challenges did you face in terms of collaboration with Jupyter Notebooks? So again, 30 seconds to a minute. Tell us what challenges you faced. I know you guys face challenges. There's gotta be something. Let's see. Simultaneous editing of code. That definitely makes sense. So I've definitely run into that problem myself where I might edit some parts of a notebook and someone else does, and then we both try to commit and we have merge conflicts, kind of like we saw yesterday. Anyone else? Okay, well, Chris, I may call on you since you answered. How did you get around this simultaneous editing of code? What tools did you use or approaches did you take to kind of resolve those issues?
We used like GitHub repositories, and I think like also having like a Slack channel to also look at updates and say, oh, I'm going to commit now, and just kind of get everything on the same page is much better than say, just using Jupyter Notebook. I feel like Jupyter Notebook doesn't really have enough to really resolve like these kinds of simultaneous editing conflicts.
That is such a great point. And I love that you brought up several different things that are really important. So I love that you guys are chatting through the Slack channel. Two, I love that you're talking about using GitHub for doing the collaboration to kind of manage the state of your repository and of your code, and not just using the Jupyter Notebooks locally and then maybe emailing them or like attaching them to a Slack message or something like that. That's a really great point. And I also like that you talked about like having to discuss with each other when you are going to commit. I think that's a really great point. And sometimes that can really present a challenge. I think you really hit on the big one, which is this simultaneous editing of code, or even if you're using GitHub, how it is that you would manage a merge conflict. So as you guys probably know, working with Jupyter Notebooks, it's a little bit different than what a Python script would look like. So each Python script is just like a line of code, as opposed to Jupyter Notebooks where you have cells. And those cells and the structure of that notebook is JSON. So when you have conflicts in Jupyter Notebooks, you have conflicts in JSON, as opposed to being able to directly edit those. So those are, I'm definitely with you guys on that. I've definitely experienced those same exact things. Something else that I think is cool that we talked about, like between working singularly and together on group work, is that the same issue that you face while you're working alone, so wanting to separate things into separate notebooks, becomes even more of a significant challenge whenever you're working with several different people. So maybe two people are building models and they want to use some piece of data. So you generally want for them to use the same data. So if everyone is using a different way of reading it in and maybe a different way of processing, it would be really difficult to be able to then compare the models because you really don't know how the data was created. Also, if someone has like a really great piece of code that everyone else wants to use in their notebooks, how would they be able to access that without just generally connecting the kernels? So as it turns out, there are some really great packages that are able to do this. And the one that is most powerful currently is going to be Nbdev, which puts together a lot of different things and conflict resolution approaches to be able to deliver something that is really helpful in terms of collaborating using Jupyter Notebooks. So let's quickly take a look at their documentation right quick. So I'm going to send over the link and you can look at it with me, but I'm also going to share my screen. And I'm trying to put things in the chat. Here you go. That should be the link to what we're looking at. And Adam, that is such a great point. I've definitely experienced that. And so what Adam is saying is that people have different environments when they're working on different projects. So let's say that my pandas is version like 1 and someone else's is version 0. Like the implementation of those different packages can really cause some errors as you're trying to collaborate. So that's a really great point. All right, so let me share my screen and let's take a look together. Okay. So this is going to be the Nbdev documentation. And so a lot of the things, if you want to go and learn more about Nbdev than what we're going to talk about today, this is a great place to go to learn more about that. So let's see what they're saying. So first, we learned that Nbdev is going to be a library that's going to help us to collaborate using Jupyter Notebooks, namely being able to put all of our code, tests, and documentation in one place. So something that's really awesome about that and something that they highlight is that allows us to have a literate programming environment. So what does that mean? I don't know if you've scripted using Python before, so just a bunch of .py files. It can be kind of challenging to understand the order of those or what's going on, why someone did something. So of course you have the comments that you're able to put in, but as you know, with Jupyter Notebooks, you're able to put down Markdown, you're able to show plots. And so that works really, really great with data science. The second thing is it makes debugging a little bit quicker. And this is going to come up in a moment, that Nbdev allows you to use the best software engineering practices. So the best practices for software engineering, and that documentation and tests are first-class citizens. So what does that mean? If you are building something or you're doing some analysis, you'll be able to run tests on that analysis and generate documentation, not separately from the project, not deciding to make a bunch of, window or Word documents to try to narrate what you've done, but you can actually use the Jupyter Notebooks themselves to create the documentation. So this is just a side point. If you're on Windows right now, there are sometimes some challenges with Nbdev. Find a working version for you. And then use that one. And at this current time, I would suggest that you install using pip. Using Conda does generate some strange behavior. So right now I've been using pip to install. So in the context of the challenges that we just presented, let's look at some of the features that Nbdev is able to offer. So we talked about not being able to share code easily between notebooks. And we said that, yes, some IDEs are able to support the shared kernel behavior. Another approach is to instead build all the functions in one notebook, export them as a module, and then import that module in the notebook in which you need to use them. Interesting. That's an interesting approach. Well, as it were, Nbdev actually supports this approach. So for example, you're able to create Python modules, and the way that they format those modules is in a way that is really in line with the best practices. Oh, whew, sorry, we almost left the meeting. In line with the best practices of Python modules. And so that's one of the biggest points that we're going to talk about today, because I know that that causes some consternation when you're working on projects together. The great thing about this as well is this will allow you to get away from extra super duper long notebooks and instead be able to separate your notebooks into different approaches. So let's see, so that's that one. The second thing is that you are able very well to resolve merge conflicts in a human readable format. So as we said before, we have JSON for Jupyter Notebooks. That's the implementation of Jupyter Notebooks. And whenever you have merge conflicts, generally your package is going to add the rendering of those merge conflicts in the actual code, meaning in the JSON. This means that your notebook will break. So whenever you go to try to open it to try to resolve the merge conflicts, you won't actually even be able to see them. And beyond that, that means you'll have to open the actual code of the Jupyter Notebook and try to resolve the merge conflicts within the JSON, which sounds like a terrible, it sounds terrible, and it is terrible. So Nbdev is able to provide functionality to get around that. And the way that they do that is they move the merge conflict indicators into the notebook so that it's rendered and you can make changes to the cells in the markdown by looking at the notebook as opposed to having to do it in the JSON. So those are the two things that we're going to talk about big time today and tomorrow. But I did want to bring your attention to some other really, really great things that Nbdev offers that you may want to look at on your own. So the first thing is, and this is something that I really love, is that now that you've actually created your Python modules for really your own use to help you, you can easily make that into something that can help everyone. So let's say that you're working on a project that is widely applicable. You can actually make that into a package for distribution. And Nbdev provides utilities that are able to automate the uploading to PyPy, which is the Python pip distribution, and Anaconda. So that is pretty awesome. A second thing that we said was that you're able to automatically generate documentation from your Jupyter Notebooks. So again, you're not going around and trying to generate this documentation somewhere else. You're using your Jupyter Notebooks that you've made. Next, you're able to write tests in your Jupyter Notebook. So it's not like this separate file where you run the test. I'm not sure if you're familiar with other languages, but often it's other notebooks or other pieces of code where you run your tests. So instead of that, you're able to run the tests directly in the Jupyter Notebooks as you would, like as your mind is thinking while you're coding. Also, something that is really nice is that when you're working with other people, sometimes it is good to have checks on just the general code that is pushed to the repository. And Nbdev supports this thing called continuous integration through GitHub Actions. And so that basically means that your tests that you've written will run automatically once you upload or push your code to your repository. And also it'll run some checks on the code itself. So for example, one thing that it'll run is that it'll make sure that the modules that you've created actually match the notebooks that you've written, right? So there's the possibility that you could write a notebook, generate a module from it, change the notebook, and not update the module. Now everybody's using the module and it doesn't have the updated version of the code. So these GitHub Actions, they'll make sure that those two things match. Also, it'll help you in terms of collaboration, in terms of removing some of the annoying metadata. So it's helpful metadata, but it can be just a little bit annoying. So for example, you have execution counts in Jupyter Notebooks. If someone runs a notebook, someone else runs a notebook, and you both commit having made no changes, the execution counts alone can create merge conflicts, which is just a little bit annoying. So Nbdev can also help you manage that. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask at this point before we jump right into using Google Collab and see what all the humdrum is about? All right, that's sounding really good. All right, I'm pumped. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a repository that we've made from the Nbdev template. Okay, so if you want to try this on your own, I suggest reading through this document and working through the tutorials. There's also a tutorial for Google Collab, but we will do that kind of together today, parts of it. And so you'll be able to find the template. And again, that is what we have made. So let me send you the link to the repo. So here you go, here. So this is the repo that you're going to be using today. And you can see some interesting things here that you might not always see in a repository. So in repository, you tend to always see your notebooks, and that's what these are, of course. You tend to see a license, you tend to see a README, but some of these other things you don't tend to see. So for example, this thing here, this is the continuous integration that we talked about. These will contain the documentation if you choose to build documentation. So this is a docs folder. And something also great about this is that this Nbdev provides integration with GitHub pages. So you'll be able to actually render your documents from your Jupyter Notebooks using GitHub pages. Some other things that you'll see is the settings file. This one is how you set up your Nbdev repository. And so this is something that you'll have to go over kind of while you're learning more about Nbdev, but I've set this up for you now. The main things to know about is that this here, this lib name, this will be the name of the package that you'll create or the library that you'll create. You'll fill in all these just different things that really are applicable to PyPy. And lastly, one thing that I've added in here that I really like is this test flags. So this is a flag that we've just added because tests are a first class citizen in Nbdev. There are some things that maybe you don't want to test. Maybe they run super slow, and we can add flags in our notebooks to say, hey, don't run this one. What did that mean? Well, let's take a look. All right, so going to Nbdev Playground. Oh, before we jump into this, so we're going to be using Google Collab today. And so for that reason, it takes just a few more steps to set up Google Collab than it does on your local computer. We're doing that just to make sure that we can standardize the environment and that everyone doesn't have to worry about installing Python and Anaconda and Nbdev and virtual environments. We don't want to get into that. So we're just going to be using Google Collab. But again, that does introduce a few more steps. If you fall behind, it's okay. You probably would be best served by just following along with us and then going back and viewing the video. Also, if you fall behind while we're coding together, you can always feel free to open up the solutions. So the Xero core, for example, is a notebook that we'll be working in together, but the solutions have all the solutions to what we're gonna do. So if you ever fall behind or don't know what to write, maybe don't know Python very well, you can always open up these and go with that. All right, great. So let's jump right on in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to open the Collab. So we're going to use this badge. We're just going to click on it, which is going to allow us to open this in Google Collab. So let's click there. And you should see that Vanderbilt Data Science is here and the repository is Nbdev Playground, and we're on the branch master. So this provides all the notebooks that we can look at. We're going to look at the Xero Collab setup notebook. So you're just going to go ahead and click on this one, Xero Collab setup. So let's click on that one. All right, so this is a notebook that we have. This is a regular Jupyter notebook, and it has some instructions about what we're going to do. And so we'll just talk through those and do them together. And again, if you fall behind, please feel free to just like kind of stop doing it, watch, and then go back and review. Okay, so again, Google Collab has a few extra steps, and so we're going to do these extra steps to make sure everything is set up. So the first thing that we want to do is add a file system that we'll always be able to access. And the way that we're going to do that is to mount our own Google Drives. So if you don't have a Gmail address, you probably would have already had trouble even getting here. In fact, let's pause for a moment. Is everyone able to access Google Collab? And if you are not, put up a red X. Where are? All right, it looks like things are looking pretty good. All right, good. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to mount our drive. And so if you fall behind on this step, this one step is going to be a few steps. So if you fall behind, please feel free to just follow these steps. And then, or just watch the video afterwards. So here we're going to mount the drive. We're going to press run. So this is running the cell. This is just saying, hey, Google didn't write this. What's up? We're going to run it anyways. Oops. I've already run this before. So what you'll see here is that, okay, hold on just a second.
And I can show my screen real quickly if you'd like.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, great. So what you'll see when you run this is it's going to open this up. It's going to ask you. It's going to say, "Hey, can we access your desktop?" Because it has to have all this access. Keep in mind, this is only for this one session. So this is not giving Collab, permission forevermore. It's just once. And once you click allow, then it's going to generate this special key. And clicking here will copy the key to the keyboard, to your notebook. We'll copy it to your clipboard. And then you can go back to Collab and tell it what that authorization code was. And you just paste it in there. And again, what this is doing is it's kind of like you start up Google Collab and it has no hard drive attached. So what you're doing here is you're saying, use my own Google Drive as my hard drive for this one session. Here's the authorization code, so you can go in without me, being in the middle, and you can treat it just like it's a hard drive. Hit enter, and there you go.
Sometimes it takes a little second. There we go. And you can see that it says mounted at /content/drive. Thank you for that, Jesse. Thank you. All right, perfect. All right, and now let's see. Now that we've mounted Google Drive, you can see it here. So what I did is I went over here to this little file folder, clicked on it, and now you can see that there's this thing called Drive. So what is that? Well, let's open it and see what's going on. There's another one inside called My Drive. Oh my goodness, and all of this are the files that I have on my Google Drive. Fantastic. So now our file system is mounted. So now what are we trying to do? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to clone the repository onto our Google Drive. Okay, so now we have Google Drive mounted. Now we're going to CD into the drive, basically meaning that right now we're in like this up folder and we want to get into Drive because we want to clone somewhere in my drive. So we're just going to CD right into it. So you can run this one. Oh my gosh, I'm having a rough day. Maybe I unmounted it.
You're still already there. You're already in my drive, so you can't go any deeper.
And then we are going to go ahead and clone the repository right into our drive. So we're just going to press play here, and it should clone the repository. Woo! No struggle there. At least I had the good sense to delete that from previous runs. All right, and so this should look pretty familiar to you. If you were here yesterday, you see that we're cloning, and then it's unpacking all the objects in the repository. So let's see, you can either refresh or wait for it to show up here, but I'm just gonna go and click this refresh button. And you can see here that now we have this folder called Nbdev Playground, and it is in our drive. Fantastic. All right. So now we'll just open this like we normally do on our own computers. You go right in here. Usually you do like, you get a terminal and just pop it open, right? So let's try that. We're going to open 004. That's the one that we're going to be working in. So let's double click that one. Oh no, it shows us the JSON. It's a little bit upsetting. So it's not open. And this is just somewhere. So how can we get to this file that we want to actually open? Well, as it were, you can just go to your drive. So I've included the link here that you can just click on it. It's going to open up your drive. Here, depending on how this is rendered, mine is just rendered like this. You're just going to go and you're going to click on your folder. So this is the clone repository, right? Click on that one. Oh, interesting. So this is actually the repository. If you were to look at this and look at the Nbdev Playground that we just were looking at on GitHub, this is the clone repository. So this is great. Okay, so now how are we going to open up this file? Well, here's the file here, 004. This is the one we're looking at. We're just gonna right click it, open with Google Collab. And wonderful. So now we're actually editing the file that's in our repository on our Google Drive. Exciting. So now let's open this up. Let's see where we're at. So we're going to be connecting. Initialize and connect it. Oh my gosh, the drive is gone. That's okay. We're just going to go ahead and mount it again. So as Jesse was saying, it persists. The session or the mount persists between notebooks or sessions. So we just have to mount this one again. So here we go. You can also run this first. You can run it second. You can run it at any time, but before we get here. So I'm just gonna have to go ahead and run this one. It's gonna say a lot to us. This just installs Nbdev into your kernel. Okay, looks like it was successful. Great. Oops, let's get there. I'm just gonna close this because it's like super long. Then we are going to mount our drive again. Let's see if it says the same things. No. So here, I will go ahead and do the same thing. So if you got lost before, you can see it again here. We click on this link. It opens us up a new browser window where it wants us to say it's okay that you have access. I choose this account. I give it access. And then I copy my code, copy it to my clipboard, and then paste it here, and I press enter. And it says, that's fine, you're mounted. Great. So now that we're mounted, let's just go ahead and refresh that, take a look, make sure, okay, we have my drive. Let's look into my drive. Look, there's Nbdev Playground. So now we need to CD into that directory. So now we'll just run this one. So we're CDing into this slash that. So let's run that one. We can see that we're there. So now we're there. Okay, so what have we done with all this? This is Google Collab stuff. So what have we done? We have cloned the repository somewhere and we've opened a notebook. So just keep that in mind. When you're on your own computer, there would be like just those steps. Install Nbdev, clone the repository, git clone whatever, open up your IDE, open up the notebook. Okay, so this is just a few extra things because we're on Collab.
And that's because we're on Google Collab, and so that you sort of have to first have this. So Google Collab sort of forces you to open up your repository, but you need to have already been running Nbdev for it all to work through. So just because we're on Google Collab, you have to like do this sort of two-step where you open it up, you do everything, and then you kind of do it again, but you open it from your Google Drive, so it already will have been opened.
Absolutely.
So just a little bit of a pain because of that. Do you have to do that every time that you're going to be working with Nbdev on that you want to work with Nbdev in Google Collab? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, well, you do it. Well, so just, it depends, but once you've cloned this, any repository, once you've cloned it here, you will always have to open it through Google Drive.
Okay. Okay. But once you've done that, then you can just open it through Google Drive and then you're good. You just have to remember, always open through Google Drive.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this was, I was sort of rushing to sort of keep up with this. So in case you can't tell, Dr. Bell knows all this a lot better than I do. But just a note to other people who may have sort of dropped off the bus on the way here, rewatch the video, and pause as you're doing it. So if you're kind of lost right now, don't worry. Go back, rewatch the video and sort of pause and then redo. Because then Collab's a really nice environment. And do know that if you are going to be working locally, this is not even a problem. You don't have to worry about this part.
If we have time at the end, I can also just kind of show you how to do it on your own computer, just to ambiguate a bit. Also, actually, in the Xero Collab setup, after this, is a little description about what would be different. And it's basically that you need to just install Nbdev on your own local computer first. And then after that, you still need to navigate to the directory that you want. You still got to clone, get in directory, open the IDE. It's just the steps look very different on Google Collab. So that is great. All right, let's see. All right, so now that we have our repository, let's experience together Nbdev. Okay, so Nbdev has a little bit of setup that you have to do the first time only. And then after that, you don't do it again. So that setup is to install Git Hooks. So what does that mean? Let's run it. And these may take just a little bit of seconds, but we can see here that it says hooks are installed and repos git config is now trusted. But that really wasn't helpful in explaining what happened. Well, I'm just going to add just one cell here. And basically what I did to open that is just click here, and then this showed up and I clicked on it. I'm just going to type exclamation point ls-al. And so just side note, these exclamation points are to say that the thing that follows is a bash command. And so that's something that is provided by the Python kernel. So here what we're doing is we're listing the contents of this directory and showing the hidden files, because we would not be able to see it here. There we go. So you see some different things here, right? So there are things here that are not here. And so what we have done with the install Git Hooks is added a few more little pieces of Git information that kind of hook into the Git versioning system. And so basically what happens is when you commit something to the repository, now it's going to try to automatically clean your metadata out, and it's going to make your notebooks trusted. And those are what the Git Hooks do. Well, that's one of the things that the Git Hooks do. So these are super helpful in not having to do all the steps that we're about to talk about. Okay, so what else? So the next thing that Nbdev recommends that you do, so this is very much a first time thing, but these things you regularly do, but you also want to do them the first time. So the first thing is clean NBs. This is actually going to strip out all of your metadata. So I'm going to run this. Okay, we're going to see something interesting that happens. Okay, so nothing happened there, but give it a second. We're also going to go ahead and build the library. Okay, so wait a second. So save failed. Now that I've cleaned the NBs, the save failed. What the mess does that mean? It says the file was updated remotely or in another tab. What happened was that Nbdev removed all the metadata out of here in the background. And so here it's saying something is different about this notebook, like it doesn't match anymore. That's okay on Collab. If you were on your own notebook, you would see that there was a difference after you looked at it. It's still okay though. So we're just gonna let that be. We're gonna go ahead and save it. We're gonna let it overwrite the existing changes. It's okay. But normally you would just refresh on your own local computer and it would be fine. Okay, so what is building lib? So let's just inspect. Just look at this. There's one directory. So Nbdev Playground, one directory, some files. Let's see what happens when we build lib. Oh, interesting. It said it converted some stuff. What does that mean? And it looks like it converted all of the notebooks. Well, let's refresh this, see if anything happened in that directory. Interesting. So now we have this directory called Nbdev Playground in Nbdev Playground. I wonder what that is. Well, let's look, right? Or look at init.py. That looks like that file that you need whenever you're trying to create a module in Python. This looks like another file. Interesting. We can even click on it and take a look at what this is. It's not going to be very descriptive right now. Sure not. But we can still look at it. Let's look at this Nbdev one. I'm just double clicking. Interesting. That's that all thing that they were talking about just then. Interesting. Index modules. What's this? Curious. So this is not really making a bunch of sense right now, but let's see. Let's just investigate. And then we can build the docs. So you can or cannot do this right now. In general, you want to do this the first time you run it, but this may just take a little second that I don't want to expend. But you can run it if you like. All right. So now that we've done the initialization, let's see what it's like to build a module. So let's say, for example, that we're in the situation that I think maybe Chris described, that we have this data and maybe we're in a different situation where our data isn't clean, or our data is so huge that we actually we could clean it faster than we could load it, which is a weird statement, but it is possible. So let's see, what if we want to write a function that assists in the loading of this data, okay? And then we have other notebooks where we would want to use this. Well, let's see what that would look like. So let's just create a function, and maybe what our function needs to do as we read the data is just append a line ending. Maybe we have like a list of text names, and then we need to add .pdf because that would be the PDF file that we're loading. So we can try that. So let's make a file or a function called append line ending, okay? And we're just gonna pass in some string, And then what we're going to do with that string is we're going to just add .pdf. That's all we're going to do. So let's run this one. And then we might want to do a unit test, right? Maybe we don't know if this is working. Well, let's see if it is working. Okay, so now we're going to have test string, and we're going to call it a new file. And now we're going to append line ending to test string and see how that goes. Okay, so it looks like our function is working. Great. So now we're almost there, right? Now we just need to figure out how can we make this into a module? So quick question, thumbs up or green check if you think that right now we could use this function, this append line ending in a different notebook. Red X if you do not think that we could use this append line ending in another notebook. And the red X's have it. There's no way to use this in another notebook right now. So how can we make that happen? Well, looks like we're able to build some modules. Maybe we should build a module out of this notebook. And maybe we want to export certain cells to that module. So what if we just added that to this line? We're just going to throw in a flag that says, hey, by the way, I want to export that cell. Okay, so now we have some insight into the specific cells that we want to export. So it looks like we want to export this one. Looks like we don't want to export this one. But what are we going to export it to? Well, we can define that as well. You tend to define this one at the top. So how do we indicate that? Well, we want the default module that it'll export to be some name. So we want all these functions here to export to maybe something called core. So what is this saying? Everything that we say pound export, every cell that says pound export, we want to put that into a module called core. Interesting. So now let's save that guy. Interesting. And now, how do we build this library? Man, it seems like there is an Nbdev command that, that builds a library. Nbdev build lib. Curious. So let's see. I've stuck that right here just in case you want to run it. Oh, not this one, this one. Usually before I build my libraries, I clean my notebooks, which is so unnecessary because again, the Git Hooks do it. But I do it anyways. You can skip this one. And now let's just build the library. Let's see how that goes. Interesting. So it doesn't tell us anything more than it did last time. But now let's refresh this. Oh, core. That looks like the thing that we said default X for. It looks like maybe, I wonder if maybe the things that we said that we wanted to export, if those specific cells are somehow in this file. Well, let's see. Oh my goodness. So now, it looks like we've exported this module or exported this cell, which is this cell, to a module called core.py. When we said that we wanted by default to export to core. So core.py is going to be our module. That's pretty helpful. But now the whole point of this, right, was to be able to use this in other notebooks. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we're going to need another notebook. That's number one. So I just save everything. So I just saved that again. Control S, by the way. So I'm going to close this guy. So now let's say we have another notebook. How are we going to open it? Same way. Go back to your drive. Oh, there it is. And now let's say we have whatever, and we're going to try to do some EDA on it. So let's open this one. Right click, open with Google Collab. Often you can just directly click on these, but if in case it doesn't open by default in Google Collab, you can right click and force it to. So y'all know what it is. different notebook, different kernel. It's time again. It's time again. Pip install. Let's go. You guys know the steps. Pip install. You need to install Nbdev.
So every time you you open up another notebook, it's spinning up another virtual machine for you, and you have to sort of install those packages again. Okay.
Well, let's look here. Oh my God, no drive. You know what it is? Drive mount time. Get your clipboard ready. Click. You guys are going to be pros at this by the time this is over. You can be able to do this in your sleep. I'm going to select myself, my account. I'm going to give access. Copy and paste and enter. And we're authorizing. Great, we've mounted it, but now we are still at /content. Now we need to get back into Nbdev Playground because we need to play with our modules. So run this one. Great. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so now we just opened our notebook. Locally, all we've done is open our notebook. So let's see, now let's say we want to use that function that we had before. Let's see, let me see if I can try to do that right now. What was it called? Or say, it was called append line ending. Okay, so I'm just going to do append line ending, and I'm just going to pass in a string. This is my file. Interesting. I can't use it, but y'all told me I couldn't use it. So what's the difference between what we had before and what we have now? Well, we have a module that we're able to import. Just like these are modules that we can import, we can also import our own. What does that look like? Well, as we said before, we have, let's get there, Nbdev Playground. So we're right now in Nbdev Playground, and we want to import core. Well, let's say that from Nbdev Playground .core, import everything. And so it's your decision about how you want to import this. There is some consternation about the star import, right? Because it can overwrite some of your variables in your file that you're in, or your kernel that you're in, but you did write it. So let's see. And there are also different ways to implement this. So from Nbdev Playground, import core. Okay, so now it looks like we've imported that. I wonder if we can now append line ending. Interesting. It even auto completes that for us as if the module is there. Well, let's see. A file here. Let's see if it works. Oh my goodness. So now it has now worked in another notebook. Now this is super helpful. Interesting. So let's see how we might use this on a set of files. So again, let's say we just have a list of people, but each person in a different file has like a PDF file of their name. So how can we do that? Well, we can use a list comprehension right quick, or a for loop, but we'll just list comprehension it. For name in names list. So that's going to iterate through the entire names list. For each one, we want to append file ending for that name. Oh, we didn't run this. So let's run that one. So we'll get that in kernel memory. Okay, now let's see what happens here. Oh, something was not like append file ending file. Is it not called that? Oh, sorry. What's it called? Line ending. So clearly, I should have called that something else. It's not a line ending, it's definitely a file ending. And there we go. There we go. So this, for each of these names in this list, we've actually now done this functionality. So now if we have 10 people on our project and we all need to append this file, I think, we all need to use this functionality. We can all use the same thing in different notebooks. So I think we have time for a moment here. Tell me a little bit about how you think that you could use this within one of your collaborative projects. Let's stop my share for a minute. Thoughts, feelings.
I kind of like the fact that you are like immediately on track to be like building a package. You know, if you're using this and then you're already sort of moving toward creating something that you could share more broadly outside of your group too. I mean, it helps inside the group, but you know, it's kind of like how much more work would you need to do to sort of make that even more useful? Add a little bit of documentation, and then you're like, hey, go ahead and use my package. I think that's really cool.
I totally agree. Anyone else?
I agree with Jesse. I think that just having like a sort of system where you have a file with some code and like some functions and being able to use that in another file, like I just really like that. I feel like I can definitely apply that to some of my some portions of my project where code might be super long or where I might have a lot of functions.
That's a great point. Good point. Anyone else?
Yeah, listen, so I like the way what I like so far is how you're explaining how each line of code works, because the code that I see in Python, when I was in class, I usually use like Java and whatnot, but I noticed a lot of those terms that are similar, like for loops, and you're explaining how that all goes through. So it's a good idea to help me and everybody else here to understand how each part of the line works and what to expect after you put in the code. So it's very good so far too. I think the project you did too also reminisce so far is what you're doing so far is making making PDF files for each of those names?
So this is not making PDF files, although depending on this function, it could. All this is actually doing is just with a string that you passed in, it's just appending some more letters onto that. So this is a string. When we pass it into this function, all it does is add .pdf. So now it's just a different string.
That would be, seems more like a file extension in my point of view, but
yes.
You just put it like a string though, did you?
I did an awful job at naming this, but this should be maybe what you say, append file extension. That's a really great point. And I really like that you brought that up because it is important to have like function names that describe the things that are being done. This one, like if you were to read this, you might think that this is like appending a new line or appending a semicolon. So I really like that you brought that up.
Because otherwise it looks like to me like you would have created these files in a way, because it's always a good idea to know the extensions of those kind of strings that you're putting into, because otherwise if you do something wrong, you might have like a different kind of a file that or something that could get in the way.
You know, something occurred to me too that, you know, it wasn't that long ago that before Nbdev, where people had multiple had multiple notebooks, and they were copying and pasting the code so you could call the function, you know, in this other notebook, and that just totally breaks versioning, because then you have like multiple copies, and which version is it? And I can see how that would just be awful. Well, now if you want to change the code or mature it or anything like that, you just change it in that one place. You run those functions again, and then the next time that anybody imports, that's going to be the updated function, and then you get your versioning back. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, just one thing to know is I know the stakeholders, if they were to look at test this project in your code spot, they would find a way. Some people would find a way to see if there's any errors in the code by trying to break it or whatnot. So just keeping that in mind. in that regard. I'm glad you're explaining all the code in detail right now.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. Let's discuss just a few more things in our last month. Well, we have about 30 minutes left. I'm not sure if we'll need all those 30 minutes. So you might, be able to leave early, but let's see. So something that we talked about with Nbdev here. I'm just going to go on back to this. Is this: tests and documentation are first-class citizens. Interesting. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about the tests, but you can go back and learn a little bit more about the documentation because it follows right along with all the things that we've done.
Great. And did you want to share your screen?
Oh, thank you. Here I was just pointing things out. No one could see. All right, there we go. All right, so let's see what this looks like or how this manifests in our repository in our code. So let's come back to 004, for example. Look at this one. So this right here was exported, right? And we said that one specifically will be exported. Which of these are the tests? Which of these are considered tests? Meaning that they should be run to determine whether they generate errors or generate assertion errors or warnings. Which one of these is that? Thoughts? Which one? Let me just.
Well, can I take a guess then? I think you go back to, but wait, you put in, first off, core functionality. You put in, that's your own code that you just put in initially, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then isn't it, so it's, I think two things. I think it either be that, it could be that, the area right there for core functionality where you would test it, or it's going back to the other section with the MBV build documents. Are you testing those kind of files to see if they work on to the, if they'll put those kind of files onto the drive, right?
Interesting statement.
So I'm saying it's either the core functionality area or the one above it.
Ah, I see. Interesting. Other thoughts, anyone? For some reason, I've also lost my chat, so I can't read it.
No chat yet. Can we cheat and just look at the comment and figure out where the test is?
Good. Yes.
So Mateo says, it's where it says test, is that where it is?
I love that. This is the test that we would want, we might want, well, sort of. This is the test, a test or a test area. We might want to test that our append file ending function works as desired. So let's just roll back for a second. Pretend this isn't append file ending, line ending, because it's not file ending. Pretend it's not that. Pretend that it's a function that does some piece of analysis. And so maybe someone decides that this piece of analysis is not fast enough, or it takes too many computational resources and they need to rewrite it, okay? So there's already a test written right here. Now they commit that to the repository. You would think that the test that ran here should have the same exact answer, even with the different code that they've implemented, right? So that is what Nbdev is after. And so this is a place where we would put a test, and in our minds we say, this is the test. But actually Nbdev, so where someone said this, they said it was here and here. They're right, but it's also every single cell that's in here. Every single cell that you see written here is a part of the test, because tests are first-class citizens of Nbdev. So all of these things are considered a test. So it could be the case that you don't want some of these to be tests. And the way that you would do that is to use that flag that we talked about. And so that is the flag that I declared, and it's called no test. So maybe if I didn't want Nbdev to test this cell, I might write no test there. This is just a flag that says, hey, Nbdev, when you're checking to see if the code is right, don't run the cell. Maybe this one, maybe I don't want it to run that one. I would type no test there, and it won't run that one as a test either. But sometimes when you're doing analysis, you kind of don't want any tests to run. So like for me, sometimes when I'm trying to do like this analysis, it's really not about testing specific things. It's more about exploring the area. And so whenever I go now to commit to GitHub, my tests fail. And we'll see what that looks like in just a second. So maybe I don't want any of these to be a test. Well, I could leave this here, but I'm not going to. And this one too. What I could do instead is tell Nbdev, hey, all the cells in this notebook are no test. And this tells Nbdev, when you look at any of cells in the notebook, don't run tests on them. Okay. So now, what if we want to understand the output of our test? How could we do that? How could we see on Google Collab or on our local directory how our tests are doing if we had them? Well, let's dive into the API and take a look. So let's see. Nbdev, we're back here. What can we use? So far, we've been doing a lot of exclamation points in Google Collab, meaning that we're using bash commands, meaning that we're using command line functions. Let's see if there are any other command line functions that are available. Oh, interesting. It looks like there's several. So there's build lib, which we've already talked about. Update lib, which is something that you can look into, but we might have time to look into today. Diff nbs. Interesting. Does anyone see anything here that we might be able to use to test the notebooks? Any functions?
Mateo says test NBS.
Oh my gosh, that is perfect. It is most certainly one that the one that we can use. All right, and my chat is back. Thank you, Lord, for it. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So let's just ease right on over to this core again. Well, let's see what it's like to implement that. So all I'm going to do here is click here, scroll down here, plus code. And then let's just type that. What was it? Nbdev test nbs. See how that goes. So it looks like it is testing all of those. Let's see, and it looks like all of our tests are currently passing. Now, why is that? One, it's because none of the things in here generate errors. Two, it's because all of the modules are installed. So like pandas and those things are already installed on here. And three, I forgot what number one was, but all of them are testing because the code is correct and not producing errors, and all of the modules that you need here are present. Okay, so this is a way that you can run your tests. Let me see, what is the last thing that I wanted to tell you? So the last thing I wanted to talk about was this update lib. So we're not going to try this one out today, but you can try it out on your own. Let's look at what that one does and think about it for a second. Propagates any change. So this is it here. propagates any change in the modules matching F name to the notebooks that created them. Interesting. Now, keep in mind, this tool is only designed for small changes such as typos or small bug fixes. You can't add new cells in the notebook from the library. What did that mean? Well, let's take a look. So rolling back here, let's look at Nbdev Playground. First of all, let's look at Nbdev again, because some things have changed since we built the library. First of all, you see some great things here, right? First of all, you see the index, and you can see the name of our function and what notebook it came from. You can also see the modules that we have. So if we were to have 10 modules, you'd see them all listed here. And if we were to have multiple notebooks with different functions, then we would have them all listed here. Number 2, let's go on back to core. Let's say that I made a little mistake here. Little mistake, right? So maybe I wanted this to be, that would be a big mistake. Maybe all the files already end with period. And all I need to add is the PDF part. Man, it would be really nice if I could just, right? That would be really nice. Turns out that you can do that. Now this is functionality that I tend to almost never use because I think more about the notebooks. And if I was going to make a change here, it's likely that the notebooks themselves, the markdown itself would need to change. The comments need to change, all that stuff. So I tend not to make changes like that. So I don't usually use that one. And also I always tend, whenever I look at this module, it says auto-generated, do not edit. So I don't really like to edit it, but you can for small changes. And once you make these changes and run that command line functionality, then you should be set for your notebook itself to be updated, that particular cell. And again, I tend not to do that because I think more about the notebook and the literate programming. If I were to make a mistake in the notebook, then I would feel like I need to fix the notebook itself. But this is something also that you can do. Lastly, let's just take a moment and look at a project in which we have applied this functionality. So I am going to show you, let's see, legal case classifier. So this is a project that we've worked on in collaboration with the law school. And you can see here that we have, this is legal case classifier. We have, looks like that is a Git Hooks stuff here. Interesting. Looks like these are more Nbdev stuff here. Well, okay, we already even have this. But we can see here, yep, this is an Nbdev repository. Okay, so we have lots of functions. I think maybe it has to be about 10 people working on this project. And there are a ton of, okay, this is not a ton, but it's many notebooks in here, okay? So let me give you an example. This notebook right here, this is a modeling notebook. And so it provides functionality to read in data and also do some different modeling using a deep learning framework called Fast.ai, and we're using ULMFit. So we have a bunch of different variables that need to be able to be classified and models built for. So the functionality is implemented here. Let's see if it opens. Sometimes it fights. It's a big file. We'll see. All right, there we go. So this is just one implementation. So there's 55 different variables. And this is one that we're going to be looking at in this file. But to address this variable, we're going to create all of this different code that we can use. Okay, so so you can see some things here that might look mighty familiar. You can see that something nice about this is also when you add doc strings and documentation like this, it helps you while you're coding with the contextual pop-up menus. So those have been really nice for us. But anyways, the point is this particular notebook is the one where we explored the usage of ULMFit for classifying a specific variable. But again, there's a ton of variables that we need to use this on. So then by using Nbdev, look at this notebook is actually relatively long because it has a lot of functionality in here. What if we had to do this for 55 different variables? It would be very difficult for our collaborator to look through all of this and understand what is happening, what are the results. So for that reason, we used Nbdev, okay, one of those reasons. And you can see here that we have our module that we created, a lot of different modules inside. So this is our package, and this is a lot of modules inside. You can see that we have lots of different functions inside of those. And so actually, if there was a similar project like this, we could package this up to PyPy and directly use it as well. So now let's see how we applied this. So again, we have 55 variables, and we called those experiments to see how they worked. These are some of our variables here, right? So let's look at this one. We'll see if it opens as well. GitHub can be a little testy about this. All right, and so this is actually doing the same thing as that notebook that you just saw, the super long one. But here you can see we're importing from our own modules that we've written. And here to do the same exact thing that we did before, we just call this, which is from from the module that we had. And then these are the functions with this. So now with that, we have something that's a lot shorter. Our collaborator can look through this. This is just all the training results, and we have the actual performance results. And it's just that. Our collaborator is also able to look at the things that were misclassified. And so now, instead of this document being heavy coding, it's heavy results. So this is something that the collaborator is able to directly look at, not have to be confused by a bunch of different code, and just look and inspect the actual plots. Okay, let's see. And something that was nice about that is, again, 55 variables, bunch of different people. We don't all have to copy and paste the same notebook. We don't have to have super long notebooks, and we can work in parallel because we have the modules created. So now instead of one person having to copy and paste this one and this one and this one, we can actually all do the same thing at the same time using the modules that we created. Okie dokie. I think that's all I actually had to share with you today. Do you guys have any questions for me? And again, our tutorial session or our workshop that's going to be about merging with Jupyter Notebooks will be on Friday. So that is how you can learn more about resolving merge conflicts that are encountered in general and also through GitHub Flow. Yes, I see a question. Chetan?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious if you can maybe move the file on Git to Google Collab, or I was just kind of curious about that.
How you can move your file on Git to Google Collab?
Yeah, or if that's even a possibility.
On GitHub to Google Collab, or
right.
on your local computer with Git?
Or I guess like what you were just looking at on GitHub, that specific code and those elements, because it seemed kind of similar to the Google Collab notebook that we looked at before. So I was just kind of curious.
So let me share my screen again right quick. So I probably did not do a good job at explaining this, but this is our GitHub repository, right? So this is it for our team. And then we have all the repositories here that are relevant for our specific team, right? Or our organization. So this is just one of those playgrounds. This is the one that we've been using this whole time, Nbdev Playground, right? So let's just look at that one. So if I want to just look at the files, I can just click on them in the repository like this. But this doesn't have any interactivity. I can't, there's no editing there. The way that we kind of made this particular thing happen is we added this Open in Collab badge, which allows us then to open any of these files on Collab. The problem being that you only open the notebook, and if you wanted to have access to the repository itself, you would have to clone it, like we did when we mounted the Google Drive and did the authentication and the paste. That allowed us to mount our Google Drive, then clone to it and use that afterwards. So in terms of that project that you were just looking at, so if the question is specifically about that one, that project just happens to have some IP in it that we can't share, and that's why it's not open right now. But we can discuss with the collaborator of it in case the functionality in there is something that you're interested in, or you can let us know and we'll just pie the relevant pieces that are not the IP that's in there. So Ivan or Yvonne.
Yeah, it's Ivan. So I did manage to figure out how to download the Nbdev in the drive by changing the directory, but I also wanted to ask if, like, since I plan to watch the video later on, is there a way like I'd be able to ask for help in case like I was watching the video but then like something comes up?
Yeah, I think your TAs will be able to help you. I think you can reach out to them and then ask them for help. And if it can't get resolved, they can feel free to reach out to us as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Any more questions? All right, is anyone interested in seeing how this would look on a local computer by chance? In case you would like to clone this on your own computer instead of using Google Collab, or would you guys just like to have an early day? Oh, interested? Okay, let me show you then. And for everyone else who may not be as interested, thank you for coming. We will see you again on Friday, hopefully, where we will talk about GitHub hands-on at 12 to 1. Jesse will go over like the theory and the concepts behind GitHub Flow, or wait, no, that'll be an implementation. And then I would suggest that if you're going to try to use GitHub Flow with Jupyter Notebooks, that you go to that one as well, because he will discuss how to use it with like README type files or things that are lines of code as opposed to being JSON. Okay, so, oh, Jesse, is there anything else that you wanted to add for the people who would like to go ahead and leave?
No, not at all. I just put the links into the chat. I will put it into the spreadsheet. It really is, it's not in the spreadsheet right now, but there are the links right there. 12 to 1 with the general GitHub Flow practice hands-on. 12 to 1, there's the link for it. And then right after that, from 1 to 2, GitHub Flow using Jupyter Notebooks, because it's a little bit different. But boy, when you have Nbdev and GitHub Flow, you are off to the races.
I agree. All right, fantastic. All right, let me show you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. How I tend to do this on my own computer. Okay, so this is going to be the repository that we're trying to clone. So as normal, you click this code button and you get the link to the repository. So copy that to clipboard. Now what I tend to do is I come right over here to my file explorer. Hold on, let me grab one. So here, and I'm just going to clone this. I'm just going to pick this one, R. What we got here? Win library. Maybe don't want to put it in that one. We'll just put it right here. Sorry, I'm struggling to figure out where I want to put it. Sounds good. Okay, so now I use my contextual menu for the Anaconda prompt. And I pop one up. If you do not have that, you can also just use the Windows Explorer. So you just go to, not Windows Explorer, but the Windows Start menu. So you click here or here. I tend to go to the search and you just type Anaconda And then the Anaconda prompt should show up here. And you can click this one. So here, if you don't have Anaconda, you will need to install pip, I believe, but I tend to use Anaconda. So anyways, you see that there's this thing called base. I currently do not have Nbdev in my base because I like to leave my base kind of not untouched. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cd, so change directory, into this directory. So it looks like I can cd into documents/test. Okay, it looks like I'm in the right place. Then I'm going to git clone and shift insert. And so this is going to be my repository that I'm going to clone. All right, we've got it. So you can see it back here, Nbdev Playground there. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to actually start my session, which has, or load my environment, which actually has Nbdev. So on to activate, I think this one's called DL Transformer. Yep, I think it's that one. So now I'm in this environment because it has Anaconda. So what I had done already is conda, I pip installed it. Pip install Nbdev. That's what I have already done. So this environment that I'm in already has Nbdev. If we need to make sure, we can find string in the environment. Might take a little second. It's a big environment. And I am running Zoom, but we're trying to find Nbdev, so it might take a little second. Okay, we're gonna let that decide to keep, oh, there we go. So I've got Nbdev from Python. Okay, so now we have Nbdev in our environment, and now we just need to kind of just start our environment, right? Jupyter, I use Jupyter Lab. I tend not to use Jupyter Notebook for some reasons that we talked about before, but also because it has a lot of extensions that are really nice. So now we're in test, and we start with Jupyter Lab. Things are not going quickly today. All right, and that starts there. It's taking a little second. We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it though.
The hamster is running as fast as she can.
And she is. She is. Oh, even it thinks that it's taking a long time. There we go. There we go. We made it. We made it. So now let's open Nbdev Playground, and we can see we have all the things here that we wanted. So now again, I have another command line open. What is the one that we had before? 00 core. What are the things that we did before? We said hashtag default X. Oh, still loading. Okay, we're just gonna see if we can do this. Default X core. That's something that we said that we were gonna do. Again, we don't have to do any of these things now. Ooh, but we do have to do this one. We'll come back to that. So I'm gonna save that. And I am also gonna create this function, def test function, not helpful, in string return yes. So now we're just gonna test function. You can pass in anything. It'll tell us yes. Good. So now we have that. We're gonna save it. We can see here that we have not initialized this repository. It doesn't have the module, so there's no Nbdev Playground. So we actually need to do all of these things. I like to do this from a terminal. I don't know why, I just do. So here is another terminal. This one is still in test. So I think I need to CD into Nbdev Playground, right? I also need to be in my environments. So conda activate DL transformer. Otherwise, I won't have any access to the Nbdev command line functions. And now I just do exactly what it says here. Nbdev install Git Hooks. It's trying.
And after you run it for the, do you need to run it for the first time each session, or just run it one time for the for that repo for that project?
The one time for that project. That is a good point. Thank you for making that clarification. Okay, so now I'm gonna clean my notebooks as well. I'm still not gonna build a library because I don't want to deal with the time that will take. Now I nbdev build lib. And for a moment here, let's observe the thing that we could not observe on Google Collab, which is going to be this clean nbs. So you see here, this is a 1 and this is a 2. These are execution counts. They haven't been updated yet, mostly because this file needs to be updated. So let's just refresh this. Oh, I forgot that that's taking a long time right now. Close some of these ones. Help it out a little bit. Okay. And we can see that this has now been cleaned, right? So there are no execution counts. So now we have no source of merge conflicts on things that are not important. However, we also didn't clear the outputs. So now if this was a plot, if it was a table, we would still have those, but we would not have the execution counts and just a bit more metadata.
And it seems like just a small thing, but it's going to trigger on, oh, this says a 6, yours says a 7, simply because somebody else executed one other thing before that one. And it says, oh, there's a difference here. You better resolve this conflict. I can think of nothing more frustrating than it doesn't matter. They're just execution counts.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And so many for every cell if they differ.
Oh, that's right. You have 100 cells that you execute. It's like you've got to resolve the conflict. For all, you can't use it unless you have something like this.
It's rough. And so here you can see that we still have the same functionality. Core. Oh, I failed there. Because, does anybody know why it wasn't in core even though I built this? Thoughts, anyone? That is right. I never told it to export that cell. So it had no idea what I wanted. All righty. I think that is about it. And I think we're at the end of our time. But if you guys have any further questions, please feel free to contact your TAs. Again, resolving merge conflicts on Friday. And I will see you all then.
Yay.